Hello, Mike. Good morning. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jack. I just wanted to start out with a funny sciencey thing. Okay,
All
so
right.
here's the
Okay.
funny sciencey thing. Um, it it's about keeping time. So we were just talking about the rarity and expense of different objects, right? The
Mm.
pipes and I guess there's nothing really. I have, by the way, for some reason, someone's got to invent a lighter. Let's just put it out there. Can someone? I have all these lighters. They are really inconsistent. I just don't
Mhm.
understand like why I guess we got into this jet age where everything's like a jet that bursts propane out of it somehow and because lighting cigars is a little bit time
Yeah.
consuming. Anyway, they all seem to fail really quickly and even my really fancy lighter is acting up. So put it out
And
there. If
and
someone
you
knows a
know
good one.
the aficionados will tell you that really the best way to light a cigar is with a white fire, not with a blue fire, right? So kind of going back to old-fashioned matches, probably improves the taste a little bit.
I think you could have something there. Maybe that's my point is this modernity. Now we can really turn this into a topic, right? Because the whole point
Mm.
was time
Mm.
and the intense quest of knowing what time it is. Actually is kind of a fun topic because apparently there's lots of layers to time, and without time, and the real reason why it's interesting is because every so often there's a difference between the Earth revolving time and the time that we
Mm.
keep. There's a discrepancy because the Earth is
Mm.
not perfect,
Mm.
and the vibrations that we count from quartz or whatever kind of thing,
Yeah.
those are fairly perfect, but they go out of sync.
Yeah, yeah. Apparently, if you put like a something really heavy object, right? Like you create a dam, like a Hoover Dam, but maybe bigger. Like the Chinese has built something, very, very big on one of the rivers and kind of like basically made a huge, huge lake, and a very big, heavy dam. Apparently, that is affecting the rotational speed of the whole planet, by a very little, but you can measure it.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. Yeah, I mean that's the way the world works, right? Everything influences everything else. How's that? It's like
Yeah.
there's no special point of view, as Einstein was always fond of saying, right?
Yeah.
There's privilege.
Mm.
There's no privileged point of view, and there's nothing is ever at rest. But anyway, so you've got all these clocks, and I guess there's this idea that there's an actual very precise timepiece beyond atomic clocks. But what happens is if you want these two to reconcile, right? The actual point of time is that we have this 24-hour clock that we made up. Just so
Mm.
happens because we live here and we it makes
Mm.
sense to us.
Mm.
Anyway, that you have to reconcile the two by having a second added. And some of the ways the problem with this is the computers really are very sticklers for time.
Mm.
They only operate based on word lengths and things like this that have to be incredibly precise. And to do that, you have to have precise amounts of time,
Mm.
which don't
Yeah.
exist. We made them up basically because I being a couple minutes late to this meeting, you know, par for the course. Speaking of which, how many meetings do you go to every week where
Mm.
just the 10 minutes or so getting started of people just arriving and figuring out what this meeting's about?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much all the time. I mean, but it's a little bit of an organizational culture, right? Sometimes, there's cultures where the meetings are really starting on time but go long, right? But then there is, the other way, right? Like the meetings kind of tend to end, maybe on time or sh more shortly, but people kind of like are more kind of so the beginning of the meeting timing is a cultural part, and the ending of the meeting timing, like going over or shorter, is also a cultural time. But usually, interestingly, it's kind of one or the other, right? So there's cultures where meetings always are on time, starting, right? And there's also culture that are meeting always end on time, but the other side, is usually kind of a little bit more flexible.
I there's something fascinating about that, right? Because I think I remember at least maybe it was my own it's obviously my own frame of reference, but I always thought in my older in one of my positions that why is it that this topic took 1 hour to figure out? That's what I always never could figure out. Is the
Mm.
idea that somehow why would this take this prescribed amount of time to deal with? And many would say I think that could be a good topic, I guess, right? That
Mm.
I'm sort of complaining to academics about this right now, which is everyone bemoans, using LLMs because they're so quick, and that students are being, they're
Mm.
using them, right? And they're,
Mm.
therefore, that brings into question a lot of testing things. Like, do you know this stuff? And it's kind of been given out now that nobody knows anything anymore, right? There isn't any reason to. LLMs can manage, to do the work just fine. And I
Mm.
agree, they're usually just as fine as people. So my counter is that, we've done this all wrong. The point of being in school is to get rapid feedback from making lots of mistakes. That's the ideal in life, right? Like you do a lot of things wrong, but you get feedback pretty quickly so that you can change your mind, correct, and so on and so forth. And so it's learned behavior.
Well, actually, I always thought that school is about something else. I always thought that school is about being an A student so that you don't make any mistakes like from the get-go, like you have the corrected knowledge already kind of digested in your head, and then everybody else is just a failure because the feedback
Mm.
would be, hey, you failed. You see, this guy got an A, but this guy got a B, made mistakes. This guy made a C, made a lot of mistakes, and then there is everybody else who is not supposed to be even at school because they are not good enough. So that is kind of like there's other cultures, in the educational systems based on the German, like Central European kind of like Russian style, right, where school is really about kind of showing that you don't need feedback, right? You're just proving that you already know. You can open the book, get the material, and yeah, that's correct. That you
Well,
will.
and as you've just proven, you are correct. That is also our system. I guess what I'm saying is we've made a mistake. We've made a mistake that's now being shown to us, right? Which is
Mhm.
if let's say it has to be regurgitation, right? It's not learned behavior. You just heard it and you regurgitate it because that's what it means. Um, when you do that, you don't really learn. That's what I'm
Mhm.
saying is the point. Like you learn to perform, but performance is not mastery, right? If anyone has ever danced or played a musical
Yeah.
instrument. You see what I mean? Is like you don't get there without this process. And you certainly can't get there, I think, in mathematics or in computer science. In fact, I think computer science is the best example. The whole point of computers is they instantly break, right? That was what's so miraculous about them. They almost immediately tell you when you screwed up.
Mm.
And there's little cost to that, right? There's little
Yeah.
cost to saying, oh man, my thing didn't compile, except now you're sitting there and you're waiting for that's probably the problem with running LLMs, right? Is they can work on an agentic process for what now, hours or days or I don't know how many tokens, right? And then they come up with something that's absolutely convincing. And now you're like, oh man, now the tough part is this worthwhile? Going back
Mm.
to these meetings, right? Like, hey, did we actually accomplish something in this meeting? It's really hard to tell, right? I mean, we all feel good or bad, or so and so said something dumb, but so and so said something smart. And so it's all evened out, and therefore we're a functional, happy, productive team.
Yeah.
Let's go cash our checks. I think, isn't that? Well, I think this is going to be maybe a tangent as always, but is that going to change things? And so I've been really in this idea of change, right? Do we
Mm.
change because of LLMs? So starting with education, do we have to change this performance model? I'm
Yeah. So
advocating that we should because you know what I mean. This is the preparation not for today, but for tomorrow. Like if you aren't resilient, in my mind, that's
mm.
when trouble happens, because we all know fairly non-distant future will be different than it is now. It'll be similar, but it'll be different in some fundamental way. right?
Yeah. Well, I guess there was this podcast. I think it's Peter Diamandis, one of the guys that makes the the Moonshot podcast. Pretty technical. I like them. And
Mm-hmm.
he was visiting the White House, and he was talking to the chief science advisor, for the administration about the AI in education, right? And I think the conversation drifted that, well, maybe we need a parallel track, right? Like, let's keep the education going because we are really not quite sure, whether AI is kind of beneficial or not. We all hear the stories that, hey, students do like assignments with AI and it's 90%, but then they go to the final exam that is pen and paper and they score like a D or worse, right? So then the conversation that they had was kind of, hey, let's do something in parallel. So maybe after school, let's equip the students with the AI so that they can tinker with that. But the actual learning process, we really don't know how to augment or improve, but maybe we're gonna be shooting ourselves in the foot because that creativity and all that AI supported stuff that you can do. I mean, maybe it's not actually working.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we're very myopic being in America, right? Because we're really, really big and we tend to think that there's only one way to do things. But I think of it quite a bit of like probably maybe your background certainly is that if you go up in another country, European country, for example, you're pretty much way incentivized to understand and write and read English, no matter what your language is, which is interesting, right?
Mm.
Because LLMs could easily translate things for you, right? And I was just watching a movie last night. By the way, big thumbs up for the movie The Conformist by Bertolucci. It's a
Mm.
didn't realize it's kind of a comedy, but anyway, it's a 60s film, but it was about Mussolini and fascism and all this other
Mm.
kind of stuff. And but it's also, I think, a satire. So I was
Mm.
trying to look it up because most people don't say it's a satire, and I'm like, I found it incredibly funny, um, the way he presents this. Anyway, so I was just checking LLMs because I couldn't find anybody that talked about how funny this movie was, and I kept wondering, like, what am I?
Mm.
Seems obvious, but hey, that's why maybe this idea of conformity is an issue, and it's also called the conformist, right? So it's like it's kind
Yeah.
of a comedic title.
Mm.
And anyway, eh, sideways. Oh, but I don't think just because you can get LLMs to translate any language for you doesn't mean that you can speak or function in
Mm.
English, right? And I think that's the
Yeah.
problem with grades, right? If you can get a good grade in a test, which I used to get great grades in my Japanese language tests here in
Mm.
America, and then I completely failed when I got to Japan because I can barely understand spoken Japanese. It's like that. But I was an English teacher, which is why if you hear someone speak English and you can
Mm.
kind of piece it together, maybe over time, then you can understand this language. But do you see what I mean? Maybe I'm
Mm.
making an unfair, but I think of this with math quite often, right? Like they don't teach you why do you need to know math. They just teach you math and they let you fail and they weed people out. And we used to do that in computer science, right? Hey, if you can't handle Java, if you can't handle this, we're weeding you out.
Mm.
And I think that's what's bad about many educational situations because that means we don't allow failure, right? Failure isn't important or interesting.
Mm.
Only mastery is important or interesting, right? But I'm like, well, nothing, you don't go to auto mechanic school and learn to work on every car, right? Like you only learn some principles that you then have to apply, and then you make a lot of mistakes and the oil runs all over the ground and so on and so forth,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you can still definitely be a good auto mechanic. It just means you
Mm.
will have to internalize and manage mistakes, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. There's this
And
joke, right, in
mhm.
the academic circles, like how long does it take to learn, like a like a Japanese or Mandarin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you ask a professor, and the professor will tell you, hey, oh, it's a lifetime project, it's really never ending, right? Then you add a doctor, like a PhD, how long does it take? And oh, you're probably 10 years, you should be good, right? And then you ask a student, how long does it take? And the answer is, so when is the exam? So yeah, I mean,
That's a good point.
the school is ultimately a very short time horizon, right? So there is
Mm.
absolutely no time to digest and master. I mean, you really have to be truly, an exceptional mind to be able to go to a violin school and learn violin in a few years so that you pass the exam with an A, right? That you do all the exercises correctly and your tone is perfect and your pitch is perfect, right? And that applies to pretty much everything that we have in school. There's not enough time to digest anything, right? So some
Well, but you
perhaps,
brought up
right?
another fallacy, which is that assumes there is a way to play a violin, which I think is another puzzle, right? Like there is some marker, and I just think of it in terms of AI now, right? Like there's some benchmark now, which I have
Mm,
no idea what that could even mean, right? But it's there just so that you can rate yourself. And this is
yeah.
just maybe our own folly, right? Because
Mm.
didn't we say a year ago that GPT-4 was just fine? I think I said that. I'm like, it's fine. I mean,
Well,
it
yeah.
it's the privileged viewpoint, which is that, oh, if the model is better, then my result is better. And I'm like, no, they're I don't think they even correlate, do they?
Mm.
Well, you would know actually. What's your opinion?
Well, I think that this is really kind of like a deep topic that you are bringing up, right? Like, hey, so what is the marker? What is the measurement, right? Like Jimi Hendrix, of all people, he didn't even know how to hold the guitar. He played upside down, and
Left-handed, yeah.
absolutely kind of totally zero formal education. Turns out to be the one of the greatest guitarists in the world. Everybody is now trying to kind of like learn from him, right? And the same applies again, to going back to the podcast, with the White House, chief of science, advisor, whatever, right? I mean, they started talking about, what is the problem with the research? Well, the research is that problem is that the old guard is basically, having, control over the funding. Right. So if you have a truly revolutionary idea and you want to fund it, they will tell you you are crazy because that's not what they understand. Right. Publications, the same thing. Truly revolutionary ideas, you are not going to get published in the best papers, most likely. So you will have to be like extremely kind of well supported by somebody with a really big name to be able to move forward. And then maybe that's kind of the way to do it, right? You're hoping that you have like a truly great professor. And by the way, I was lucky to have that kind of support with those kind of older professors that kind of allowed me to, let's say, publish something. And basically by having their name on the paper, that kind of goes into maybe something new, right? Allows this paper to be accepted or
By the way,
funded, right?
same with me. If you
Yeah.
hadn't put your name on the paper we published, right, way back when, I would never have gotten to go to Munich and present, So there you go.
Yeah, but that was really, I was not well known or anything, and still I'm not, right? It's
You have
it's
your
just
doctorate. That's good enough. That's
yeah,
good for
yeah.
me.
So that is the mechanism, right? So the same with the AI, right? Like what are supposed to be the benchmarks even? Do we really know? It is a really difficult subject, and in the educational field now the quality of the outcome is just an absolutely crazy topic, right? Like how do you measure that, right? And in most cases, the measurement is really, hey, is it really matching the textbook, which in itself might be very deficient.
Well, and to many, including me, I think there is something magical about that, right? Because that's the idea of, go and figure it out is a big part of most institutions, right? We talk about legal, right?
Mhm.
If you're legal, or hey, I'm in this world of design. I mean, one of the concepts here is that I don't know anything about this business, right? I don't know what you do. I don't know how it works, but my role is to make it look good and do whatever designers do. You see what I mean? Like you have a frame and you don't step outside that frame. And one of my, of course, problems in life is that I love to step outside of my frame because I'm like, well, I'm actually here for the customers who don't know how your business works at all. And in a sense, I'm trying to explain it to them. Right. So I'm in this weird middle person who has to explain something if I don't understand it, tough to explain. Right. But they're like, you don't need to explain anything. Here's the brief, just do this. Actually, that never happens in business. It only happens in advertising. We have this thing called a brief that actually explains things because we're not supposed to understand anything. So we only understand what's on the brief. And I kept making another joke, which is my joke, is that we have requirements in business. And in creative work, we have briefs, and I was like, it should just be the opposite, honestly. We need requirements in creative work, and we need briefs in business work. How's that? Funny? No, I don't know. Well, because requirements get very tangled, and it's the same thing is that they become a death by a thousand cuts. You forget why you're doing something or what the outcomes are, I think. You often have a hard time prioritizing or measuring anything in real business because, like you said, hey, we've got an hour to set our plan for this week, or we've got stand-up in the morning. You ever do stand-up? They still do that?
In comedy?
Yeah, or whatever, Agile, Scrum, stand-up. I don't know what it gets attached to.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. It's actually in some
I mean, it's always
organizations,
been there. No one, in my mind, has ever used it properly or has any idea of why you do it. But it still takes you time, and I think it's more of like, are you here and breathing check? Like, I don't know. Is that it? I'm here.
Well, the problem with stand-ups is that they usually are full of the SMEs, that we often make fun of, and they.
Well, then they're definitely just putting a mirror in front of their nose, right? I'm here to SME. If you need any SMEing, I'm right here.
Yeah. So in a way that's useful, right? Because all they do is they have like the Jira whatever table, and they kind of, hey, did you do this? Was it 1 hour
well,
or 2
that
hours?
I think is its fallacy, is that it's not supposed to be for that reason that you do it, right? Like it isn't an outcome-oriented situation. It's a process-oriented thing where you're supposed to say, why don't you and I get together and talk about that later? See what I mean? For 5 minutes, because I always think like, if you can't solve it in 5 minutes, you're not going to solve it. You're just going to bring up more problems. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that might not have been true in kind of like a complex system development. Like if you are building a video game, which is an extremely complex system, and probably one of the kind of like more kind of on the pinnacle of complexity. I mean, there is very few systems that are maybe more complex than a video game, right? I mean,
100%. Yeah.
So
they have to be self-contained in every sense, right?
Yeah. So if you tweak one thing, you have a cascade maybe of things that you have to change, and this is definitely not a 5-minute discussion about anything almost, right? But yeah, I mean, ideally, but now we have those AIs, right? That can really, I mean, nobody wants to read anything to the brief writer and all that, but now you can give it to the AI, and the quality of the brief and all the write-ups begins right now to be paramount to the quality and the economy of your token usage, because you really want to make sure that tomorrow morning, if you come back after the agentic process finishes and it used 1 million tokens, that this is something that you really wanted.
Actually, I never put the 2 and 2 together, so now's my next article is now we have to get good at writing briefs.
Yeah.
Weirdly, because we were terrible at it before, right? And the requirements aren't necessarily, well, let's go there for a second, because we were talking last week about filling out a form. So I think of filling out a form as being kind of the lingua franca of why AIs can't work. to the extent that we think they should, which is that every company, and from personal experience, I've been responsible for this, is that they develop systems that nobody knows how they work, but they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they, for some reason or another, break, like we were getting to the time thing. Apparently, the leap second problem, that if a second is introduced, all computers will crash because they have to keep time. And if the time server, this leap second is something that gets introduced, I was saying, when geo rotation starts to mismatch time, right? So there's two ways to keep time, but the second is added, yay, right? So, but it crashes everything. So the fun people at Google and Apple and these other people that keep time, because there are many of them that are kind of responsible for time across huge swaths of systems. And of course, banking, everything relies on it, right? Like you have to know what time it is universally to make things work. So they're up there looking at GPS signals, which is a good way to keep time because they all say, hey, it's this time. Back to relativity, time differs, in different places. So they all have to kind of make an average guess. I don't know. There's some math. Who knows? But this time thing, the extra second, Google, I thought was really clever. Apparently what they do is the day that it's going to be added, they just slow things down a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah, so they basically just make the clock run a tiny bit slower for an entire day to make up that second. And because the things aren't that, they are much worse off at a break, right? It's like the 2000 bug back in the day, right? Like if you just didn't know what 4-digit dates were, you can't figure it out. Like you'll just break when it goes to zero. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Well, because I think all time started in 72 or something. There's some weird thing like if you just reset the clocks, because they're all local. All these clocks are local and they don't know anything. They have to go ask something every once in a while. But those still continue to work because you have to have a clock on a computer. I mean, that's how they work, right?
Yeah. By the way, total tangent. I think.
Yeah.
I think talking about Google or Alphabet, the parent company. I think this week or last week was the first time, or in a very long time, for Google to have like a negative cash flow because they are spending so much on the data centers.
Well, yeah, revenue. Revenue is an interesting idea, right? Yeah. Isn't that what's happening with SpaceX, right? It's like, where are you supposed to get all this money from exactly? I don't know, but
from us, that's from us.
Oh, is it? Oh, we're gonna pony up the cash for whatever. Okay.
Yeah, they are forcefully kind of like changing the rules so that the index funds, and everybody else has to buy the stock, right? So. Put it in the index.
Too big to fail, as they once said, right? Isn't that the idea?
But going back to writing, right? I mean, I feel like I'm writing a lot more. Sometimes even I feel it in my fingers because writing code is such a deliberate thing. You write very little. If you write a page or two a day, of code, then that's a lot, right? But, for writing briefs and instructions and specifications, problem descriptions, then, I feel like I write, like 20, 30 pages a day.
Well, and back to schooling, I mean, it's great to be able to sit there with a pencil and paper and to tease out the answer to a multiplication problem. But, not too long ago, in fact, as soon as possible, people outsource that to logarithms. We talked about that in an episode, right? Because it's like, hey, it's just much, much easier to add than multiply. And here's this cool way to do it, which really works, right? This is a true fact that these tables manage to do this. And remember the little slide rules? It's like, okay, this number and this number equal. So you always were outsourcing the hard work. And I also want to write a thing about, the laziest people on earth are mathematicians, right? Like that is baked into their DNA because you don't want to spend time doing the stuff kids do in school, right? That's what you definitely don't want to do. And if you're spending all of your time coding, for example, how much better to have I mean, just think of every language, right? Python. Oh, it's
Mm.
already in there. It's a struct. It's a, you know what I mean? Like we make
Yeah.
libraries, so you never have to do this stuff again. I mean, even you and I think used to laugh about regular expressions or something, right? Like it's just magic when you think of it, of all the work you would have to do if you didn't have this tool.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and nobody kind of knows how they work, which is even more fun
Mm.
as we get into all these crypto things, right? That, oh, compression, or sorry, SSH works like this. And oh, really? That's how it works? That
Mm.
seems interestingly clumsy. But,
Mm.
you know, HTTP works, and they all work in mysterious ways. Let's put it that way. And I sent you another thing last week about how compression,
Mm.
a big buzzword in the audiophile community, because everyone thinks it's bad, and it's like, no, if you didn't have compression, you just wouldn't accomplish anything, right? Compression is intelligence.
Yeah, but there's like the compression in there's two types of compression, right? So in music, right, we are talking about compression in a sense of kind of controlling the spectrum, right? Maybe kind of like squeezing, the certain, frequency ranges, into kind of like a smaller areas, right, of the spectrum, right? And then there is the compression, which is basically a signal shortening, right? So you have the kind of like a string that kind of shows maybe a piece of code or a piece of music or a piece of video, and it has, like 100, characters in it, and then trying to kind of shorten that string without worrying about the content so much, but kind of just looking at the zeros and ones in the sequence and kind of trying to compress those zeros and ones into something that is shorter, but still retains the original information. So there's like two types of compression here.
Well, I'm going to say they're the same kind of compression. And by the way, I think everything works this way. If you think about it, right, you're going to do the least amount possible to get the maximum fidelity, right? So information in itself is always got noise that creates the idea that information even exists, right? So actually, I had to turn off my stereo because it started to make all these popping sounds. I hate it when these things happen, right? But what's doing that? Hell if I know, right? There's some mismatches or who knows. But here's this thing I perceive as noise. Okay. The thing about compressing audio is because it's a very understood frequency and Nyquist and Shannon, and we can go into all the math and stuff, right? But you can compress it. It's really easy, and you have to in many cases, right? Because there isn't any free lunch, right? This idea that I think what happened, what's interesting maybe to those people who care, everyone's lossless now. It's like this thing. I'm now. Well, that's just a conceit to me that was a poor one, only because this particular compression scheme that Apple came up with way a long time ago is practically perfect in this spectrum. You see what I mean? And because this spectrum has no variance to it, right? There's no extra information being lost. It just said, hey, this is the spectrum that you need to recreate. And guess what? People are like, oh, but it's stair steps. And you see what I mean? They just don't understand how signals work. If you have this signal and this signal, this exists, whether you like it or not, right? Like it is going to reconstruct itself perfectly. But everybody's like, no, you're throwing things out. It's like, no, I drew a line from here to here. Did it go like this and then here? Yeah, probably not. Right? There probably wasn't anything going on because I met such a, it's like an atom, right? We all say that, yeah, atoms, they get detected here and they start here, so they go straight there. It's like, well, no, they don't. They go everywhere. It just so happens that you have a detector there. That's what makes this work. Isn't because it's basically it's not choosing weird paths, I guess, is why. So you can easily compress. The problem now is that we just have bandwidth that's so much higher than it used to be that now you can get away with it as a marketing deal that you don't compress, even though you're sending out massive amounts more data. Which is, I think, a concern about data spending, we can go back there. It's like, well, if that continues to be needed, I think there's a little, maybe we're almost to the point we can predict the future, right? So in this talk, the future to me is interesting, that if indeed the world as a whole, or even just America or whatever, developed nations become hooked on AI, like we're hooked on phonics, we're hooked on AI. Well, that's sort of similar to the distributed issue of ISPs and the internet, right? Like I was working in a company once upon a time, NTT, right? Here's Japan. How does Japan get data from here to from US where they do trade? Because a lot of this had to do with trading. How did they get the data from here to Japan? Well, they have a big cable under the sea. And part of the engineer's job was that, hey, if we make newer cables in different configurations, we can beat the speed of light to get things just a little bit faster. Which is, in trading terms, a big deal, because it's almost like seeing the future, which is why, hey, we can put this into the time thing, right? Everyone is on slightly different times, and if you know that, you can exploit it. And guess what? That's what we do, right? If you can exploit an advantage, which was laying undersea cables seemed very tedious and expensive to me, but it's something that people did. And, now that we might see the same with satellites and such, there's always going to be a split second advantage somebody may have. But my question is if you're doing that on the internet, one thing that was important at the time was some ubiquitous upside, right? It was kind of designed not to fail because of multiple nodes and DSPs and all these other things that keep this running. And I would say, between you and me, do you remember the last outage of the internet? It was a long time ago, but it was predicted a lot that this would all fail, right? You can't depend on this thing. It's going to fail. Do you remember? It was a long time ago.
There was something like that.
I think it was Ethernet or something. That was like the protocol just wasn't sound enough or something like that. And I know IPv6 is a big deal too, right? You run out of addresses. So you need more numbers.
Yeah.
And now that you're shoveling, uncompressed audio files because people think it makes a difference, you're almost, actually, it's a huge bandwidth issue, right? It's probably 10 times, I'm going to guess, as much data, maybe more, for the same thing, which is not true of video, which is another funny thing, right? That you get audio and video for less bandwidth because you definitely are compressing it. It's definitely compressed, but no one's complained yet, as far as I remember. And we're like, oh, wow, I get to see video on my phone. This is great. But back to AI, is I wonder this concentration. That seems weird right now, right? I know that's maybe beyond, but we have an hour-long meeting and it's like, we'll all solve all the problems in an hour, right?
Yeah.
No, but I just don't think it can't have single points of failure, can it? Because if you're sitting there, tokening your ass off over in El Paso and distributing it out based on the speed of light to your customers, I mean, it's still, bandwidth is an issue. Won't it always be? I know you're just going local. You're a local man. I'm not depending on DSPs, but I was like, well, then won't everything be a local model? Why not, right?
Well, right now the majority of the intelligence, right, kind of crossing the wires is basically text, right? So it's a very low bandwidth requirement.
Oh, okay.
But the
compute's pretty high, though. I mean, those tokens they're not cheap.
The compute, but in terms of the size, they are small. It's just once they get into the matrix multiplication, that's where the complexity starts, right?
Right.
But as we move forward towards the multimodal AI, where the output is not text but video, right?
Sure.
But the input is just a command again. So give me a new version of the Star Wars movie, right? And Revenge of the Jedi, right? Or Revenge of somebody else, right? Then the bandwidth that will be required for you to see the movie is going to be like maybe 2 hours of MPEG-4, right? That is a very high.
That's really
Yeah.
compressible, though. See, this is
Yeah.
what's interesting is the
Yeah.
consumption of things and the creation of things are low bandwidth. If we look in our little world, right? Like, we're not sending that much. When I ask for Apple to play a piece of music, right, my request is really tiny.
Mm.
But its duty then is to go find the damn thing and do whatever and start chopping it up and getting the router and whatever it's got to do, right? The whatever Cisco figured out way back when, right? Of however it manages to do me plus everybody else, because we've got Netflix, right? It's going to serve up the movie to you, and maybe it saves some bandwidth. Remember, what was that technology once that everybody was quite into to steal things? It was called torrent.
Yeah.
That somehow, because this other person also asked for the same piece of info as you guys could share. I think that was the idea, right? It was another bandwidth saving deal, which is like, hey, you don't have to know everything. Is more people that know it. Maybe this is now a philosophic treatise for us, right? The more that people cooperate, the better off you are, right? It's easier. But my thing is still about point of failure is that if you say to this model, create the new Star Wars, so its tokens are still just figuring out some RGB values, which is text, I guess, right? It's just doing a lot of them somehow, predicting, all these numbers mean that this character is going to go from here and then it's going to move a little bit to the left or whatever. Like that, seems like a lot more tokens than text, because text is pretty compressed in itself, right? It's efficient. As one can get, whereas in like my movie, right? Everybody's watching this movie thinking it's really profound and sad or something, and I'm laughing. It's like that thing of like, hey, okay, this is how these pixels worked out. They got to my screen, and I had this experience. And I think that's where it's going to be interesting too, where I'm going to create this entire Star Wars movie. The first 15 minutes of it are going to bum you out and you're not going to like it. And then what do I do with all these things I just generated? I have to now discard them. You just turned off your feed. You see what I mean? And nobody else wants this, by the way, which is another puzzle too. Like I know they cache a little bit of what's going on with these models, right? A little bit, but you can't cache every response because it's super boring and who cares, kind of. But I think that's different from something like a Twitter or a Instagram or even Facebook. Like, I assume that Facebook has kept every one of my posts verbatim. Weird, right?
Yeah, very.
Yeah, but I mean, I know I'm paying Apple. Apple's money thing just went up. I know I'm paying Apple to store 10 years of photographs that I've taken, right? Like, I can't store them locally, really. I can, but I can't really, but that's a different topic, right? But all those things, I want you to store them, and I want you to keep them, and I'll pay you a decent amount of money, actually, to do that.
Yeah, and I don't like that particular feature, right? I prefer to buy a hard drive.
But then you've got hard drive failures. Come on, remember? Then you're back in the good old days.
The way I do it is that every so often I buy another hard drive that is
I know.
the same.
But remember,
the
I've
same
been there
price,
too.
cheaper.
It's right upon. It's the never-ending.
Never ending, but the thought, the very thought that hey, Apple is going to be training their AIs on my pictures is really not appealing to me. So I prefer a little bit of a privacy, even though it's kind of like maybe a dream that will never get realized. But
Well, I don't doubt that if I was going to train on anybody's stuff, it'd be yours, Jack. That's the point, right? You've got the best stuff.
Yeah. So,
but that's next week when we say, what are AIs training themselves on anyway? Because I still think that's a puzzle, only because culturally, and we can talk about it next week, but I was just thinking culturally, we probably get answers from things that have been very much trained about what it is to be in our culture, is what I'm getting at, right? Like cultural awareness is baked into responses, right? There are certain things we like and dislike in our culture. Back to the meeting time, right? But if, let's say, you were Indonesian and you asked a similar question, it probably would have no idea about what your culture and customs are like, which is maybe why also, just going back to the form, which we never got to, damn it. But the form is that this form is about your culture, right? Like, you are expecting that you can have somebody interpret the things people scrawl on this form, and it's going to be meaningful, and it's going to move the process along, and the process will digest and do what it needs to do with help from people, or just help from this information alone, right? That's what we imagine as a form. But that form doesn't translate to any place else ever, pretty much, right? Like, every boarding document, we're lucky that they're all similar. But that's legislated. Like, hey, you can't just come up with your own way of boarding an airplane and your own way of organizing your seats and your own way. Well, maybe they did at Southwest. But see what I mean? Like, you're supposed to be beholden to the system, but you created it, and it doesn't transfer to others. So Google right now, what do they do? Sell advertising? Yeah. So they figured out how to sell advertising, right? And then they just parlayed that into a lot of other money-making ideas, and most of them, I guess, break even or whatever Google does, right?
Yeah. Well, the culture is kind of interesting. I mean,
I think that's what we're training our AI on, is culture, right? Like, that's what you kind of need it to know, is that this is this culture, but this is not the same, Yeah.
But going back to the meeting idea, right? Like, how do we know that 1 hour is appropriate, right? And maybe how do we know that 5 minutes, right, is better, right? I mean, there is this story that I've heard in one of the podcasts about cigars, that there is this very exclusive Davidoff store, in like a flagship store in London, and then the owner says that one day a Japanese CEO walks into his store, right, and there's and there's like 10 people with him, his staff, right? And he kind of shows the owner of the store, hey, I have a problem with my dew point lighter, right? And then the owner of the store looks at it, kind of finagles with it, a little bit, kind of and gives him the lighter, and now it works, right? And then the CEO turns around and kind of shows, this lighter, to everybody, staff, that now it works. Right. And then, everybody bows, obviously extremely happy that now the CEO has solved the problem. Right. And it was like nothing. Right. It's just kind of like something, just kind of like out of place. Right. So you see that. So the concept here is that, maybe we need more meetings that really are kind of like a cultural kind of glue, like team building kind of a thing, where, there is obviously leadership present, so that everybody pays attention, not because they have to, but because they want to, right? Because the leader is there, right? And they following the leader, right? And kind of in a kind of general sense, right? And then what the outcomes, even small, from those meetings, gonna be now, we can capture them now with the AIs, and kind of like take benefit from them, rather than kind of, it was a 2-hour meeting, we talked, I don't even remember what we talked about, right? So there's kind of gonna be an interesting change, where that social component, which makes work fun, maybe is going to be more important.
I welcome it. I don't think that I've heard anecdotes that that's happening, right? Because it's more of a wholesale. I think it's a misunderstanding of AI. Honestly, I think that's probably the first level of anything, right? It's like, we've got to go all in, and then we don't know why, and we don't know what the goals are. So, and we're trying to have it understand our culture, and we, in a sense, don't understand our culture, right? There is no documentation of what our culture is. It's catch as catch can, right? But I will give shout out to some leaders, interestingly enough, that they managed to train us, which is important, and enable us, which is also important, to do Scrum. And this happened once upon a time. And what happened immediately is, because I was somewhat fearless and I didn't really care that much, I said, okay, well, first of all, you get to choose your own team. number one. Okay, so chose the people that I thought, I liked their work and I liked their attitudes, and we all got together. And then there was a corner office that we used to use for meetings, and I'm like, okay, well, let's all take over that office and we all work in here. And so we got our office together where we all worked every day, and our boss, who was supposed to be part of the team because that's the rules, decided that was lame and liked being in his own office better and all this other stuff. So he didn't join the team. He just kind of came in every once in a while, up until people, meaning us, put up all these signs for him to stay away, right? Because we're like, we don't need somebody to monitor us, right? Like, we can just talk. We don't need meetings, which are forbidden, by the way. You just talk, or you goof off, or do whatever you need to do, which we did. But we actually ended up being in this company, which is a big company. We were found to be the most productive team and got lauded for it, right? Because we took all the initiatives that were given, and the people that suffered, unfortunately, which I think was the problem, waited to see what management told them to do, which is, by the way, smart, right? Because if you were told to do it, then you can only blame them. Whereas we took the initiative and we took responsibility for everything. We found that it was a lot easier and a lot less stressful, and we had a really good time almost all the time and got a lot done, even though we didn't work very hard, I guess, was my takeaway, which is the way it should be. Because what we did more than make stuff was communicate better amongst a group of people, right? We did a lot more open, hey, I'm bored. You got anything for me to do? Hey, why don't you play with this? You know what I mean? And that happened a lot. And people got out of their roles, right? My design role was not needed all the time. So I did other stuff.
Yeah.
And I learned some stuff that I didn't know. I learned a lot about tuples. Tuples, man. But do you see what I mean? Like, you needed to have that experiences, because that it made you a better designer ultimately, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, well, by the way, another tangent, like the word tuple, which is kind of big in database world.
Yes, it is.
When I first came to States, I had this professor of databases, and he was Chinese, very, very thick accent, Chinese accent, and he talked about those tuples. And I hardly could understand, like he hear like his own accent. It took me like weeks, to kind of like, oh, that's what he means, right? So yeah, I'm gonna remember that word forever.
There you go. The end of a perfect episode, the tuple episode. Well, thanks, Jack. We'll pick it up again. Maybe we'll have less meetings. Who knows? I don't know.
Or maybe more. I mean, just imagine, let's say if we wanted to build a system together or a company together, like those meetings, transcribed, maybe with a little bit of also kind of like a AI vision, something similar, that we have in cars, like, hey, if you look sleepy, the car will stop, for you. Like
don't get me started with automation, but okay, yeah.
Yeah, but look, I think there would be some value kind of in having a good conversation, right? Although the danger is that
shifting perspectives. I think we could do with that one. I think that's what I encouraged in my students, is that if you ask it to, the LLM can see from a different perspective what you're looking at. It can, because it doesn't have any privileged point of view, right? All it's going to do, if you don't tell it to, is match your point of view, which you already know.
That's true too. Yeah.
Anyway, till next time.
All right, next time. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. See you.
Yeah. Cheers, Jack.